The fluorescent lights hummed like mosquitoes above my head, and the radiator under the courtroom window hissed just loud enough to make my jaw tighten. I'd been in colder rooms, metal birds over black water, concrete bunkers that smelled like oil and fear. But there was something about that little Midwestern probate courtroom that made my hands itch for a rifle I wasn't allowed to carry. Instead, I sat alone at the defendant's table in a borrowed navy blazer, palms flat, fingers still. The wood was slick under my skin, worn by generations of angry hands. Across the aisle, my parents and my brother sat in a neat, united row. Mom clutched a tissue she hadn't used yet. Dad's jaw worked like he was forever chewing on a word he wouldn't swallow. Caleb kept smoothing his tie, eyes flicking toward the gallery to make sure everyone saw him sitting with the real family. They hadn't saved me a seat. The judge's clock ticked toward 9:05. The room smelled like cheap coffee and old carpet, and the faint tang of winter mud tracked in on boots. Case number 24P113, the clerk droned. In the matter of the estate of Eleanor Hayes, petitioners Richard and Marion Hayes versus respondent Jordan Hayes. My parents rose when their lawyer did, like they were his backup singers. I stayed seated until the judge, Albright, according to the brass plate on the bench, lifted his eyes toward me. They were pale blue and surprisingly tired. "Ms. Hayes," he said. I stood then. The floor was scuffed linoleum, pretending to be wood. My boots made a dull sound on it, not the sharp heel click I was used to on polished concrete. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice didn't shake. SEAL training had burned that habit out of me years ago. I could feel eyes on the back of my neck, Mrs. Langley from the bakery, Mr. Peterson from the hardware store, people who'd watched me ride a bike down this town's cracked sidewalks, and later watched me disappear into warehouses with Navy recruiters and duffel bags. They knew my parents' version of me, the daughter who ran off, who never came home, who broke Eleanor's heart. They didn't know about the sand under my fingernails that never quite washed out, or the weight of men on stretchers I'd heaved into helicopters under fire. They didn't know my actual job title. To this room, I was just Jordan, the weird Hayes girl who'd outgrown Maple Falls and never apologized for it. "Petitioners, you may proceed," Judge Albright said. Their lawyer, Mr. Coleman, tan, shiny suit, the kind of smile that belonged on billboards for injury firms, stepped into the well of the court. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said. "We're here today because a vulnerable older woman's wishes were manipulated by a daughter who lives a chaotic, secretive life and is unfit to manage significant property." His eyes slid to me, lingering like he was trying to assess just how chaotic I looked. I'd deliberately chosen plain clothes instead of my uniform. This wasn't an Article 32 hearing. It was my grandmother's life, not the United States Navy's business. He turned back to the judge. "My clients, Richard and Marion Hayes, have lived in Ms. Eleanor Hayes' farmhouse for years," he continued. "They've cared for the property, hosted family holidays, ensured her comfort. Their son, Caleb, mowed the lawn, handled maintenance, drove her to appointments." He paced slowly, polished loafers squeaking faintly. "Meanwhile," he said, "their daughter Jordan left home at 18, rarely visited, refused to share where she was living, what she was doing, or who she was with. When she did appear, she was thin, exhausted, and disheveled. The word hung there like a dirty sock. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye, finally finding a use for the tissue. "We have no idea where she's lived these last 15 years, Coleman said. "No stable address, no job title we've ever been allowed to hear. My clients reasonably feared she was involved in, let's say, non-respectable pursuits. They are stunned that Eleanor, an organized, practical woman, left her entire estate, including the farmhouse and its considerable assets, to this daughter, while leaving them nothing of substance." I felt my fingers press harder into the table, the varnish digging into the pads. I pulled the pressure back a notch. Leaving dents wouldn't help. "And you allege undue influence?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Coleman said smoothly. At the time of the will's revision, Eleanor was in her late 70s. She'd been showing signs of memory lapses. She was increasingly isolated. This secretive daughter appears out of nowhere, spends time alone with her, and suddenly there is a will cutting out the responsible children who stayed. He gestured at me. We believe Ms. Hayes manipulated Eleanor into changing her will under conditions of emotional dependence and diminished capacity. He let that sit, then nodded to my father. Mr. Hayes, he said, would you join us up here? Dad rose, adjusting his blazer. He'd worn his good one, the navy blue with the faint pinstripe he used for funerals and interviews. He took the stand, swore to tell the truth with a hand that didn't tremble. When Coleman asked him to describe me, he didn't hesitate. She was always restless, he said. Never satisfied. Left home the second she could. We begged her to stay near family, take a normal job. She ran off to, we don't even know where. Said it was for her soul or something. What does that even mean? He snorted softly. She only ever showed up when she needed something, he added. A place to crash? A hot meal? Then she'd disappear again. No forwarding address. No phone number that worked more than a month. That was technically true if you didn't count classified rotations and the way deployment rotations shredded contact windows. She embarrassed us, he said flatly. People would ask what she was doing. We had nothing to say. My mother was next. She took the stand looking smaller than I remembered, but her words still had edges. I worried about her, she said. We all did. You hear stories about these groups, people falling into bad things, drugs, cults. She was always so secretive. Wouldn't tell us where she lived, who she was with, what she did for work. We thought maybe she was ashamed or in trouble. She glanced at me. I begged her to come home, she added. She always said she was fine in this life she chose. The air quotes hung between us like barbed wire. Caleb followed. He kept glancing toward the chairs where Grandma used to sit in church, as if expecting her to back him up. I stayed, he said. I was here. I helped with the house. I came when Mom and Dad called. I drove Grandma when she needed rides. I fixed things when they broke. And she leaves everything to someone who couldn't even bother to be here when she got sick? His throat worked around the last word. For the record, the judge said quietly, Ms. Hayes was present at her grandmother's passing. The hospice nurse's notes are in the file. Caleb flushed. She showed up at the end, he muttered. Like always, and somehow that's enough to cut all of us out? The clock ticked on. The radiator hissed. Coleman tried for more, circling the same accusations, secretive, unstable, absent, embarrassing, until the judge finally held up a hand. All right, Judge Albright said. We've heard your feelings. Now I need your facts. He peered over his glasses. Any DUIs, bankruptcies, criminal charges, evictions? He asked. Any concrete evidence that Ms. Hayes is incapable of managing property or finances? Coleman shuffled his papers. No, Your Honor, he admitted. But the secrecy. Secrecy is not by itself evidence, Albright said dryly, and a beneficiary's life choices being different from what the decedent's other family members prefer is not ground for overturning a valid will. He turned his gaze to me. Ms. Hayes, he said, would you like to respond? I stood slowly. Every movement felt deliberate, like a slow step onto a narrow beam. Yes, Your Honor, I said. Briefly. I didn't look at my parents. I looked at the judge. My employment history and current position are in the sealed section of the court file, Assas. I said, I'm prepared to answer non-classified questions about my ability to manage the estate. I'm not going to argue about feelings. My grandmother made a choice. I'm here to honor it. I let the words land, simple and uncluttered. Very well, Judge Albright said. He nodded to the clerk. Bring me the sealed attachments, he said. Let's see what we're dealing with. The clerk crossed to the bench with a thick manila folder bearing the court's seal and a bright red sticker. Confidential, sealed per order. My parents craned their necks to see. They couldn't. I already knew what was inside. Background checks, evaluations, assignment orders with half the lines blacked out, a letter from my commanding officer that had taken me 3 tries to read without my eyes burning, and 1 citation, heavy with embossed foil and language I still didn't fully feel belonged to me. The judge broke the seal. The crackle of paper was loud in the quiet room. He skimmed the first page, brows drawing together. Then he flipped to the back to the documents my CO's office had forwarded at my request. His eyes widened. He looked up at me properly for the first time, seeing past the borrowed blazer and flat hair. Ms. Hayes, he said slowly, voice carrying to the back row, is this accurate? He held up one page, enough for me to see the heading from where I was. Department of the Navy, Navy Cross. Citation for heroism. My throat went dry. Yes, Your Honor, I said. It is. He looked back down, read for a long moment, lips moving silently. Then he sat back in his chair and the old wood creaking. Wait, he said, louder this time, eyes sweeping the gallery. This is the SEAL who was just awarded the Navy Cross? The room's air pressure shifted. Someone in the back sucked in a breath. Mr. Peterson muttered, My God. The clerk's pen halted mid-stroke. I didn't move. Chief Petty Officer Jordan Hayes, the judge read aloud, United States Navy Naval Special Warfare, multiple combat deployments, commendations for valor and humanitarian rescue. He trailed off, then closed the folder gently as if it might bruise. When he looked at my parents again, the softness was gone. The respect wasn't for them. It was for the person they'd dragged into court without bothering to know. Counselor, he said to Coleman, voice very calm, we're going to talk about fitness and responsibility in light of this record. But I'll tell you now, I need to see the rest of this before we go any further. He tapped the sealed folder with one finger. And so, he added, do all of you. My parents stared at me like I'd just walked in wearing someone else's face. Caleb's mouth literally hung open. The girl they'd painted as a shameful unknown had just acquired a different frame in their minds. Not softer, harder, more dangerous, more undeniable. I met their eyes for the first time since I'd entered the courtroom. I didn't smile. I just held their gaze, steady and unflinching, as the judge turned back to the file and started reading aloud the story they'd never wanted to hear. The one I'd been living while they were busy naming me an embarrassment. Judge Albright read in silence long enough for the radiator to cycle off. The room went oddly still, like everyone was holding the same breath. I could hear the faint scrape of his thumb over the embossed seal on the citation, the soft crackle when he turned the page. He cleared his throat. For the record, he said, this court is now reviewing sealed military documents, including commendations and assignment orders. We will not discuss classified operational details. He glanced at me. Chief Hayes, he added deliberately, using the rank my parents had never cared to learn, you may remain where you are. The title rippled down the benches like a wave. Chief, not wayward daughter, not embarrassment. Chief. He turned one page back, voice dipping into the formal cadence I knew from ceremonies and promotions. This citation, he said, tapping the paper, is for the Navy Cross, the United States Navy's second highest decoration for valor in combat. It describes, without naming locations, a mission in which Chief Hayes led a small team under sustained enemy fire to extract both Allied personnel and civilians. He let his eyes skim again, lips moving as he read details the public summary barely hinted at. While wounded, he added softer. While remaining in contact with both her team and local partners. While refusing evacuation until others were safe. He looked up. Chief Hayes, is there any part of this you dispute? He asked. My throat felt thick. The scars along my ribs prickled like someone had traced a finger over them. No, Your Honor, I said. It's accurate as written. And you are currently assigned to Naval Special Warfare? He went on. As a SEAL? Yes, sir. The word slipped out before I could catch it. Old habit, he almost smiled. This court recognizes the distinction, he said. He set the citation down and flipped to the service summary. His eyes scanned lines my mother had once refused to hear over the phone when I'd tried to tell her about my first deployment. Multiple deployments, he murmured. Commendation medals, leadership billets, evaluations consistently noting exemplary judgment and exceptional reliability under pressure. His gaze shifted back to my parents and their lawyer. Mr. Coleman, he said, voice cooling, I'm looking at a record that would impress any court in this country. How exactly does this support your claim that excuse me, Chief, Hayes is unfit to manage a farmhouse and some financial accounts? Coleman's smugness had drained like air from a punctured tire. He swallowed. Your Honor, with respect, he said, this is the first time my clients are seeing any of this. They believed what they chose to believe, Judge Albright cut in, which is not the same as evidence. He folded his hands over the file. What I see before me, he went on, is an adult woman who has maintained continuous employment with the United States Navy for 15 years, passed more extensive background checks than this court could ever order, achieved one of the most demanding qualifications in the armed forces, and been entrusted with other people's lives and large amounts of government property. His tone sharpened on the last phrase. That, counselor, he said, is the definition of fit. My father shifted on the bench like the wood had turned to hot metal. Your Honor, Coleman tried again, my clients contend that Eleanor was experiencing memory issues when this will was signed. They feel she was not capable of understanding that her other child, Albright said, is a decorated special operations chief, and you have brought me no medical documentation suggesting Eleanor lacked capacity at the time of signing. He tapped another section of the file. On the contrary, and he said, I have here cognitive assessments from her physician around that same period that indicate she was sharp as a tack for her age, certainly sharp enough to decide who she trusted with her home. He leaned back, studying my parents. Mr. Hayes, he said, you testified that your daughter's life embarrassed you because you did not understand it. You also testified that she only came around when she needed something. Dad's jaw clenched. Yes, he said, that's how it felt. And yet, the judge said, she was the one at Eleanor's bedside at the end. Hospice notes say she slept in the chair for 3 nights, yes? He glanced at the file again for confirmation. Yes, he repeated. She was the one Eleanor called for by name, the one who coordinated with the nurse, with the funeral home, with the attorney. That is in your mother's own hand, Mr. Hayes. She names Jordan the one who showed up. Dad's shoulders hunched, his earlier confidence sinking into the cheap suit like it had nowhere to go. Mom made a small, wounded noise. We didn't know, she said. She never told us any of this. The judge's gaze softened by a degree, but his words stayed firm. You're not on trial for not knowing your daughter, he said. You're here because you've asked this court to overturn your mother's will. He paused. And so far, the only grounds you've presented are hurt feelings and assumptions. He turned to me again. Chief Hayes, he said, I have a few clarifying questions if you're willing. Yes, Your Honor. Without discussing classified details, he said, can you tell this court what your role entails in terms of responsibility? The answer could have been a paragraph. I trimmed it to a sentence. I'm responsible for bringing my team home alive and completing the mission, I said. In that order. And do you manage equipment, budgets, logistics? He asked. Yes, sir. Millions of dollars worth of gear, training schedules, personnel evaluations, liaison with partner units. He nodded slowly. And do you currently have any criminal record? Debt judgments? History of mismanaging funds? No, Your Honor. He looked back at Coleman. Counselor? He prompted. Coleman shuffled his papers like they might spontaneously produce a smoking gun. Your Honor, I suppose we would ask the court to consider that the secrecy surrounding her work. The secrecy is mandated by national security, Albright interrupted, not by whim. He closed the file with a quiet, decisive thump. I see no evidence, he said, that Eleanor Hayes was confused, coerced, or misled when she chose to leave her property to the granddaughter who served her country and showed up when it counted. He glanced at the clerk. We'll take a 15-minute recess, he said. When we return, I'll issue my ruling. The gavel's rap cracked through the room, sharp and final. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour and sat down. Behind me, the benches erupted into quiet chatter. Words like SEAL and Navy Cross floated in the air, bumping off the old plaster walls. I could feel my parents' gaze between my shoulder blades. I didn't turn. The clerk called, "All rise," and we did. A slow scrape of chairs on linoleum. Judge Albright disappeared through the door behind the bench. As soon as he did, the thin thread of composure in the room snapped. Jordan! My father's voice reached me before he did. He stepped into the aisle, moving like he wasn't sure whether to be angry or impressed. Up close, he looked older than I remembered. More lines around his mouth, more gray at his temples. The rigid set to his shoulders was the same. "Navy Cross," he said, almost under his breath, like the words were in a foreign language. You're a SEAL?" Mom hovered behind him, eyes glossy, hand twisting that tissue into a rope. Caleb hung back, hands stuffed into his pockets, expression caught between shame and stubborn disbelief. I turned slowly to face them. The hallway beyond the open doors smelled faintly of coffee and snow-wet coats. Out there, people laughed, phones chimed, lives went on. In here, time felt thick and heavy. "Yes," I said. "I am." Mom blinked rapidly. Why didn't you tell us?" she burst out. "We thought, God, we thought you were in trouble. Or ashamed, or because every time I tried to tell you who I wanted to be," I said, keeping my voice low, you told me it was wrong, dangerous, embarrassing. You told me to come home, get a small job, stay safe. You didn't want to hear the rest." Dad's face flushed. "We were trying to protect you," he said. "We didn't want you getting killed in some foreign mess for politicians who don't care." "I got that memo loud and clear," I said. "So I stopped sending you any." I let that hang between us. Over his shoulder, through the window, I could see Eleanor's old Buick in the parking lot, still parked where she'd left it the week before she died. My uncle hadn't had the heart to move it yet. "You talk about me running away," I went on. "But I wasn't hiding." I tapped my chest lightly, where my ID used to sit under body armor, where the metal had brushed fabric at the ceremony. "I was just living a life you didn't want to see." Caleb shifted his weight. "I mowed her lawn," he said, a little desperately. "I took her to the doctor. I was there, and she still picked you." His throat worked. "How is that fair?" he asked. "It's not about fair," I said. "It's about trust. She trusted me to steward what she'd built. That doesn't erase what you did for her. It just means she knew what she was doing." Mom made a small, broken sound. "We thought you didn't care," she whispered. "You were always gone, holidays, birthdays." "I was working," I said, "so other people's kids could have theirs." The words came out sharper than I'd planned. I didn't take them back. Dad rubbed a hand over his face. This Navy Cross thing," he said, as if naming it might make it less impossible. I didn't even know you, how close did you—" He trailed off. "How close did I come to dying?" I supplied. His jaw clenched again, but for the first time I thought I saw fear instead of anger behind it. "Close enough," I said. "Close enough that Grandma and I had a talk about what would happen if I didn't come back." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "You talked to her about your will," she said. "We talked about hers," I corrected. "She wanted to make sure someone who understood risk and responsibility would protect what she'd worked for. Someone who wouldn't sell the farm for a new SUV. Dad winced. "That's not fair," he said weakly. "It's accurate," I said. "Her words, not mine. They're in her diary. The court has that too." The courtroom doors swung wider as people filtered out to find coffee or a bathroom before the judge returned. The spell broke a little. I stepped back, giving them space. "In a few minutes," I said, "Judge Albright is going to come back in there and uphold her will. The house is legally mine. The accounts are legally mine. That's the law." I took a breath. "But after that, there's us," I added. "If you want a relationship with the woman I actually am, not the one you've been complaining about to the neighbors, that's not a legal question. That's on all of us." Dad swallowed. Mom's eyes filled again. This time, I thought, with something less like fear and more like regret. Caleb stared at the tile. "We didn't know how to ask," he muttered. "You didn't try," I said. "Not really." I glanced toward the bench door where the clerk had reappeared with a fresh stack of files. "They're about to call us back in," I said. "After that, we can talk more. Or not. That's your choice." I turned toward my table, blazer rustling. Behind me, Dad called my name. "Jordan," he said. I stopped. When I looked back, the man standing there wasn't the self-assured storyteller from church barbecues. He looked like a guy who'd just realized the world was bigger than the map he'd drawn. "I may not understand your life," he said slowly, "but I was wrong to call it embarrassing." He worked his jaw, swallowed hard. "I was wrong about a lot of things," he added. I I am proud of you, whether you like it or not." The words landed like a stray mound, unexpected, off target, but real. I didn't let my face show how much they hit. "Thank you," I said. "We can start there." The clerk called us back inside. I followed the crowd to our seats, the wooden pew creaking under my weight as I sat. Judge Albright took the bench again, gavel in hand, the sealed file in front of him. "All rise," the clerk said. We did. I fixed my eyes on the judge and squared my shoulders. Whatever came next about the house, the fields, the bank accounts, I knew one thing with bone-deep certainty as I stood there, heart steady. For once in this town, the facts were about to speak louder than the story my family had been telling about me my whole life. When we sat back down, the room felt different. Same sagging benches, same humming lights, same old clock ticking above the door, but the air wasn't thick with that smug certainty my parents had walked in with. It felt expectant. Judge Albright rested his hands on the bench, fingers folded over the sealed file like it was something alive. "This court," he began, voice steady, "has reviewed the will of the late Eleanor Hayes, the supporting documentation, the medical records, and the sealed employment and service records of her granddaughter, Chief Petty Officer Jordan Hayes, United States Navy." The titles sounded strange under the courthouse cross and dusty flags, like they belonged in a bigger room. He looked from my parents to me, to the faces on the benches and back. "I'll be blunt," he said. "There is no evidence, none, that Eleanor lacked the mental capacity to execute a will at the time this document was signed." He tapped the blue-tabbed folder containing Grandma's will. "Her physician's notes, cognitive assessments, and her own diary entries, yes, we have those, show a clear, consistent understanding of her assets and of her children's and grandchild's characters." Mom flinched slightly at the word diary. Albright opened a thinner folder. "In her own handwriting," he continued, "Eleanor writes that she loves her son and daughter-in-law, but that she does not trust them with financial responsibility. She specifically notes patterns of impulsive spending, unwise debt, and a history of asking her for money when times get tight." Dad's neck mottled red above his collar. In contrast, the judge said, she describes Jordan, Chief Hayes, as the one who serves, the one who keeps her word, and the one who shows up even when it's hard. She writes that leaving the farmhouse and accounts to Chief Hayes is not about reward, but about stewardship. He let that word hang in the air. Stewardship. It landed differently than inheritance. As for the petitioner's claim that Miss Chief Hayes lives a chaotic, secretive, irresponsible life, he went on, the sealed records show the opposite. He laid a palm on the manila file with the red sticker. "Chief Hayes has maintained continuous, honorable service in one of the most demanding communities in our armed forces," he said. "She has been entrusted with classified missions, the lives of her teammates, and significant government property. She has received multiple commendations, including the Navy Cross. For those unfamiliar, that is one step below the Medal of Honor." A few murmurs rose from the back row. "And let me be clear," he added, "they don't hand those out for chaos. They hand them out for courage, judgment, and sacrifice." He turned a cool gaze on Mr. Coleman. "Personal disappointment that your mother did not leave you the house you expected is not grounds to overturn a valid will," he said. "Nor is ignorance of your daughter's chosen career grounds to paint her as unfit." Coleman's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Accordingly," Judge Albright continued, "this court finds that the will of Eleanor Hayes was executed knowingly, voluntarily, and with full capacity. There is no evidence of undue influence by Chief Hayes, and no evidence that she is incapable of managing the estate." He picked up his gavel. "The petition to invalidate the will is denied," he said firmly. "The will stands as written. Full legal title of the farmhouse and associated assets remains with Chief Petty Officer Jordan Hayes." And the gavel came down with a sharp crack that sounded in my bones like a door slamming and another one opening. For a second, nobody moved. The radiator hissed back to life. Then the bailiff murmured, "Court is adjourned," and people began to stand, the benches creaking, coats rustling. I felt my knees want to buckle with the release, not because I doubted the outcome exactly. I'd read Margaret's will enough times to know how clean it was. I'd seen the medical assessments. I'd lived the record the judge just summarized. But hearing it out loud with my parents' accusations hanging in the air was different. It was like someone had taken all the quiet years of not being believed and pinned them to a board one by one, then shone a light on the truth. Mr. Peterson from the hardware store caught my eye as he shuffled past my row. He stopped, awkward for a moment, hat twisting in his hands. "Chief?" he said, almost shyly. Didn't know you were out there doing all that. Eleanor, she was proud. Talked about you all the time. My throat tightened. "She did?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. Didn't tell us details, just said her girl was doing big things in small places. He chuckled softly. "Guess she undersold that?" I managed a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," I said. He nodded, tapped the brim of his cap, and moved on. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving little pockets of family clustered together. My parents stayed seated until the last possible moment, as if standing would make everything Albright said more real. When they finally rose, Mom looked 10 years older than she had that morning. Dad's shoulders seemed to have caved inward, his usual broad stance narrowed. They didn't come over. Not yet. I stepped into the aisle, picked up the blue-tabbed folder from my table, and ran my thumb along its edge. The cardstock was smooth, familiar. Grandma's handwriting peeked through the first page where she'd labeled things exactly the way she always had. House, accounts, land, for Jordan. I took the stairs down from the front of the courtroom, the wood creaking under my weight. Outside that the hallway felt bigger, less suffocating. The windows along one wall let in gray Midwestern light, revealing a light dusting of snow beginning to fall. I stopped at the end of the hall near the glass door that looked out over the parking lot. Eleanor's old Buick was still there, a little island of past in a sea of newer cars. The farmhouse key in my pocket felt heavier suddenly, as if it had absorbed everything that had just happened. I heard footsteps behind me, a hesitating rhythm. "Jordan?" Dad's voice was quieter this time. I turned. He stood a few feet away, hands hanging at his sides instead of on his hips. Mom hovered just behind his shoulder. Caleb leaned against the wall a little farther down, pretending to scroll his phone, but not hitting the screen. For the first time in a long time, no one looked like they were about to give me instructions. "Congratulations," Dad said roughly. On winning." "That's not what this was," I said. "This was Grandma's choice being honored." He nodded slowly. "I know," he said. I've sat in this courthouse a lot of years. I've never heard Albright sound like that about someone." "Like what?" I asked. "Like he was..." Dad struggled for a word. "Like he was proud of you, too." The admission snuck past his defenses before he could claw it back. Mom stepped forward a half step. "We had no idea," she said softly, "about any of this. The deployments. The Navy Cross." Her voice wobbled on the last two words like they were made of glass. "I tried to tell you," I said. "Back when I enlisted. Back when I went to Coronado." She winced. "You said SEAL stuff," she protested weakly. "We thought you were being dramatic." "I said I was going to Buds," I corrected. "You told me to stop chasing attention." Dad flinched like I'd slapped him. "I was scared," he said. "You were my little girl. The military. We heard things. We saw the news. I didn't want you, shot at in some desert for some senator's career." "You wanted me at your kitchen table," I said. "Safe, small, close." He stared at the floor, scuffed the toe of his shoe against a mark in the tile. "I thought that was love," he admitted. "And when I didn't fit that mold," I said quietly, "you chose your fear over knowing me." The snow outside thickened, flakes drifting past the glass. Mom made a small sound in her throat. "I filled the silence with worst-case scenarios," she confessed. "I made up a version of you that was in trouble or ashamed. It was easier than admitting I didn't have the courage to ask who you'd actually become." Caleb finally pushed off the wall and came closer. "I was just mad," he said bluntly. You left, I stayed, I did the obvious stuff, mowing, driving, carrying boxes, and I still felt invisible. Then Grandma gives you everything and He shrugged, frustrated. I told myself she must have been confused, because if she wasn't, then that meant… He glanced away. Meant what? I asked. That she saw something in you she didn't see in me, he muttered. And I didn't want to sit with that. The honesty stung more than the earlier accusations. I folded my arms across my chest, not defensive, just containing the swell of old, complicated feelings. Grandma knew both of us, I said. She loved both of us. But she trusted me to handle this part. That doesn't mean she didn't see you, it means she saw what fit where. Dad scrubbed a hand over his face. So where does that leave us? He asked. Legally, I can guess, but us. The old me would have jumped to reassure him, to smooth it over, to crack a joke and pretend the last hour hadn't happened. The version who'd carried teammates through gunfire and sat with Eleanor while she signed her will had less appetite for pretending. It leaves us with a house, I said, and a lot of years where we didn't talk honestly. The court can't fix that. Mom's eyes glistened. Can we try? She asked. I know we don't deserve it. Not after dragging you here and saying, thinking, I cut in. You said out loud what you've thought for years. They both winced. I'm not asking you to forget it, she said. Just to let us try to earn something better than what we've been. I looked past them, out at the Buick, the swirl of snow, the brick facades of buildings I'd once thought were the whole world. Then I thought of Eleanor's kitchen. The rocking chair by the window where she used to sit with her tea, watching the fields change colors. The way she'd gripped my hand when we talked about her will. Legacy is responsibility, not prize, she'd written in that diary. She'd trusted me with more than land and accounts. She'd trusted me to decide what to do with the people attached to them. We can try, I said finally. But I'm not going to be the girl who twists herself into knots to fit your version of safe anymore. Dad nodded, eyes shining. I'm starting to see, he said quietly. You never were that girl. Behind him, the courtroom door opened and someone stepped out, letting a gust of cooler air wash down the hallway. Time to move. I need to sign a few things with the clerk, I said. Key transfers, deed confirmations. After that, I'm heading out to the farm. Mom swallowed. Can we come by? She asked. Not today, just sometime. To help. The word sounded new coming out of her mouth. Maybe, I said. On my terms. Caleb let out a breath that might have been relief. That's more than we deserve, he said. I didn't correct him. I just nodded once and stepped past them toward the door. The cold hit my face like a blessing when I stepped outside. Clean, sharp, honest. The snowflakes landed on my cheeks and eyelashes, melting into tiny trails. In the parking lot, I unlocked my truck and set the blue-tabbed folder carefully on the passenger seat. Grandma's handwriting looked back at me from the first page, steady even near the end. Jordan, if you're reading this, it means you made it home. Now we see what you do with it. I rested my hand on the cover for a moment. I'm home, Grandma, I murmured. Let's see. The farmhouse key was cold metal in my palm when I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. As I pulled out of the courthouse lot, the red brick building shrinking in my rear view, a thought settled into place like a round unlocking into a chamber. The law had done its part. Now the real work would start. Not just repainting walls and fixing porch steps, but deciding who I let cross that threshold again. The house was mine. The story we wrote inside it was still unwritten. The farmhouse met me with silence and the faint smell of dust and old soap. The gravel crunched under my tires the same way it had when I was 16 and sneaking out to meet friends at the edge of the cornfields. The porch sagged a little more now, paint flaking off the rail in curled strips. I killed the engine and sat there for a second, listening to the ticking of the cooling truck and the winter wind brushing dry stalks against the fence. The key Eleanor had pressed into my palm the last time I left Maple Falls felt heavier when I slid it into the lock. It stuck, of course it did, but a firm twist broke whatever cobweb of rust held it, and the deadbolt gave with a reluctant thunk. I stepped inside. The air was cooler than the courthouse, but smelled like home. Coffee soaked into floorboards, lemon oil on old wood, a hint of rose potpourri from a bowl she'd refreshed religiously every Sunday. Her slippers still sat by the door. For a moment, my knees wanted to give out. I shrugged off my coat, hung it on the hook she'd always used for hers, and walked through the rooms like I used to do sweeps after a breach, eyes tracing corners, cataloging details, checking for anything out of place. In the kitchen, the table was cleared, wiped, chairs pushed in. A mug sat upside down on the drying rack, water spots fading. The fridge hummed, salvation from the courthouse fluorescence. On the counter, under a magnet that read, "Coffee first, talk later," lay a worn blue notebook with my name on a sticky note. I didn't open it yet. I moved to the living room. The rocking chair by the front window waited in its usual spot, cushions slightly depressed from decades of her weight and mine, back when I'd fit in her lap. Beyond the glass, the field stretched out in winter browns and grays, the horizon a smudge under low clouds. She'd left a throw blanket folded over the arm, as if expecting to need it later. It smelled like her. Lavender detergent, peppermint, and something that was just Eleanor. I finally sat. The chair creaked the same pattern it always had, a slow back and forth like breathing, wood against wood. My shoulders dropped for the first time all day. The noise from town, from the courtroom, from my parents' hurt faces faded. It was just me, the house, and the ticking of the old mantel clock. After a few minutes, I went back to the kitchen and picked up the notebook. Her handwriting leaned a little more than it used to, but it was still neat, practical. "Jordan," the first page began, "if you're reading this, it means the lawyers did their job and you made it to this kitchen in one piece. That's 2 miracles already." A laugh caught in my throat and broke into a cough. I read on. "I know this house will be a blessing and a problem. Blessing, because you'll finally have a place to land that isn't borrowed. Problem, because it comes tied to people who think they were entitled to it." I could almost hear her voice, wry and warm. "You know how your father is about what's fair? He means what feels good to him." She'd underlined that part twice. "I'm not leaving this to you because you are perfect. I'm leaving it to you because you've lived in the world. You know what it costs to keep people alive. You know what it means to be trusted with more than you can carry and still figure out how to carry it." The words blurred. I blinked hard and kept reading. "The house, the accounts, the land, they're tools. Don't make them your god and don't hand them over to anyone who hasn't shown up when it counted." The next line made me stop. "If your parents ever come around with humility instead of demands, give them a chair at the table. Not the keys. Just a chair." I closed the notebook gently. Outside, a tractor droned in the distance, a low, steady sound. A dog barked twice and then gave up. I made coffee because my hands needed something to do. The mug warmed my fingers as I leaned against the counter, steam curling up into my face, carrying bitter and familiar. There were practical things to do, utilities in my name, insurance transfer, a survey on the north fence line. But I let them wait for an hour while I just existed in the space without fighting anyone for it. By the time the sun slid lower, painting the snow in the ditch a dull gold, I'd walked the rooms twice, opened every closet, checked the basement, and stood in the upstairs hallway where a framed photo of me in my high school graduation gown still hung slightly crooked. She'd never replaced it with a college one. This was it. The only diploma I'd ever walked for was my seal trident. And they didn't give you a frame for that. My phone buzzed. A simple text from Dad. "We're home. Let us know when we can talk." 2 days ago, that tone would have sent me straight into a loop of anxiety and planning, rehearsing apologies, strategizing how to manage him. Now Eleanor's notebook sat solid and blue on the table. I set the phone down. "Not yet," I typed back. Then, after a breath, "Soon." I hit send. The house didn't judge me for it. It just breathed quietly around me, settling in the winter cold. That night, I slept in the guest room, the one Grandma always swore had the best cross breeze in July, because I couldn't quite bring myself to take her bed. I lay on top of the quilt, listening to the wind finger the bare branches outside and the old pipe sigh when the furnace kicked on. My body cataloged the new environment automatically, One door, two windows, lock on the handle that needed replacing, floorboard by the dresser that squeaked. No incoming fire, no radios, no teammates shifting in sleeping bags 6 inches away. My mind ran through the mission like it always did before it let go. Objective 1, protect Eleanor's wish. Objective 2, decide what to do with the house. Objective 3, decide what to do with the people who were used to calling it theirs. Sleep came in fits and starts, but it came. Somewhere around 3, I woke to the sound of the mantel clock downstairs chiming the hour and realized something that made my chest feel both lighter and heavier. For the first time since I'd left home at 18, I was not sleeping in a place that belonged to the Navy or to someone else. The roof over my head was mine. Not a barracks, not a rental, not a stranger's spare room, not a cot under a tent that could be rolled up and moved. Mine. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks in the plaster like streams on a map. Grandma had trusted me with walls. Now I had to decide what kind of life I was willing to let those walls hold. The next morning, I seeded that decision into something simple. I went outside, breath fogging in the February air, and studied the front steps. The middle board was warped, grayed with years of snow and rain. The railing wobbled when I put my hand on it. It had been like that for a while. My parents had stepped over it 100 times and never fixed it. I went to the shed, found her old toolbox, and carried it back with the weight of memory, the clank of metal, the smell of oil and sawdust threading through the cold. I pried loose the warped board muscle memory from breaching drills mixing with the gentler rhythm of home repair. The wood groaned, nails squealed, a shard flew up and nicked my knuckle. A bright bead of blood welled up. I wiped it on my jeans, breathed into the sting, and kept going. Halfway through replacing the board, a truck engine sounded at the end of the drive. I didn't look up immediately. The crunch of gravel was slow, uncertain. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, Dad's old Chevy sat there, exhaust puffing in soft white bursts. He climbed out like he wasn't sure his feet still knew the way. He had a toolbox in his hand. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the frost-stiff grass. "Front step's been crooked for years," he said finally, voice offering an olive branch in the form of an obvious fact. "I noticed," I said. He gave a little half-smile. "You need an extra pair of hands?" he asked. I thought of Eleanor's note. Give them a chair, not the keys. This wasn't the keys. It was a hammer. I nodded toward the other end of the board. "Grab the other side," I said. Dad set his toolbox down like he was approaching a live wire. Up close, I could see the small details I'd missed in the courtroom. The deeper creases around his eyes. The tremor in his right hand when he picked up a hammer. The way his shoulders sloped, like somebody had finally taken a weight off and he wasn't quite sure how to stand without it. He knelt opposite me, breath puffing white in the cold air. "Those screws are rusted through," he said. "We'll need to replace them." "Figured," I answered. We fell into a wordless rhythm, me prying up old boards, him holding them steady, handing me nails without being asked. The wood smell mixed with cold dirt and a faint tang of gasoline from his truck. It was the closest thing we'd had to teamwork since I'd helped him change brake pads at 16. After a while, he broke the silence. "Your grandmother used to yell at me about this step," he said. "Said if I didn't fix it, someone would break their neck." "She wasn't wrong," I said. He huffed a small laugh. "Woman was hardly ever wrong," he admitted. He paused, watched me sink a nail with 3 clean hits. His eyes followed the hammer, then my grip, then the sure swing. "Did they teach you that in SEAL school too?" he asked, half teasing, half serious. "Grandma did," I said. "SEALs just made me faster." He smiled, but it faded quickly. "I should have been there," he said abruptly. "When you enlisted, when you shipped out, when you got that medal." The word came out awkward, like it didn't fit in his mouth. "You were at work," I reminded him. "Too busy arguing about car dealerships that overcharge." His mouth twisted. "I told myself you were doing something stupid," he said. "Made it easier to stay mad than scared." He drove the next nail a little too hard. The head sank below the grain. He swore under his breath, then sighed. "I sat in that courtroom today," he went on quietly, "hearing that judge read about you pulling people out of God knows where, and all I could think was, my God, what if I had been right? What if she hadn't come back? He looked up at me, and I'd spent her whole life being this. The hammer felt heavy in my hand. I didn't die, I said simply. I'm here. We can't rewrite the last 15 years. We can decide what we do with the next 15. He swallowed. And if I screw that up too? He asked. I met his eyes. Then that's on you, I said, not me. I'm done carrying your side of the load. He nodded, like a man accepting terms of surrender. Fair, he said. We finished the step in silence, measure, cut, set, nail. When we tested it, it didn't wobble. The wood felt solid under our boots, the way it should have years ago. As we gathered the tools, Dad cleared his throat. Your mother's making pot roast tonight, he said. She asked me to ask if you'd come. The old instinct flickered. Say yes, keep the peace, don't make it worse. Then I remembered 4 empty chairs at a reading that turned my life upside down, and 4 empty chairs at funerals they probably wouldn't be there for if they didn't change. Not tonight, I said. I need to get the heat checked, call the bank, read more of Grandma's notes. I'm tired. He nodded, rubbing a thumb along the handle of his hammer. Okay, he said. We'll try another time. He returned to his truck, started the engine, then hesitated with his hand on the gear shift. You know, he called over the engine noise, your grandmother used to sit on that porch and say, you were the bravest person in the family. He grimaced. I thought she was being dramatic. Now I think she was just paying attention. He tipped 2 fingers to his temple like a clumsy salute, then drove off, tires crunching down the drive. I watched the taillights disappear past the line of bare maples and felt something unfamiliar settle along my spine. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the first fragile outline of a world where my father's pride wasn't the only compass in the room. Behind me, the new front step waited, straight and sturdy. For the first time, I could imagine more than one person standing on it without somebody losing their balance. Mom came alone 2 days later. I saw her sedan crunch up the drive while I was on my knees in the front room pulling up an old carpet Eleanor had always hated but never bothered to change. The doorbell chimed its same slightly flat note. I wiped my hands on my jeans, checked the chain, a habit that made no sense in this town and every sense everywhere else, and opened the door. She stood on the new step, clutching a plastic grocery bag and something flat and square wrapped in an old dish towel. Cold air curled around her, bringing the faint smell of her floral perfume and the sharper bite of winter. I brought soup, she said, holding the bag up like evidence. Chicken noodle, I guessed from the smell. And, this. She lifted the wrapped square a little. Can I come in? She asked. Old muscle memory said yes, of course, before my brain caught up. I let the beat hang long enough to remind us both things had changed. Then I stepped back. Yeah, I said, you can. She walked in like she was trying not to disturb a crime scene. Her eyes flicked over the bare floor where the carpet had been, the clean counters, the absence of Eleanor's knickknacks. I'd boxed them gently the day before, labeling each carton with her neat system. It looks different, Mom said. Cleaner, I said. Less trip hazards. She winced, maybe remembering the step. We migrated to the kitchen because that's where all hard conversations in this house had always happened. I set the soup on the stove, the wrapped square on the table between us. She watched my hands move, lighting the burner, stirring, lids clinking, like she was watching someone else's daughter. I read the diary pages they gave us, she blurted as I set 2 bowls down. The ones they copied for the file. I sat opposite her, the steam from the soup ghosting up between us. What did you think? I asked. That my mother knew me better than I wanted her to, she said with a short, humorless laugh. And that she knew you better than I did. She unfolded the dish towel. A framed Polaroid slid into the light. Me at 4, sitting on Eleanor's lap on this very porch, chocolate ice cream smeared across my face, both of us laughing at something the camera hadn't caught. Young Dad stood in the background, half turned away, like he'd been about to walk back to the truck. I found it in a box in the attic, Mom said. She had it labeled, My Girls, one I raised, one I tried to. Her eyes shone. I thought she meant you and Rachel from church, she said. Now I think she meant you and me. I swallowed. She raised both of us, I said quietly. Just in different phases. Mom nodded, blinking hard. I've been angry at you for so long, she said. Angry you left. Angry you wouldn't tell me where you went, what you did. It was easier to make you the villain than admit I was. Scared and jealous and small. The last word came out on a whisper. You had all this big, terrifying, important life, she went on. And I was here folding laundry and worrying about whether the gutters would hold through winter. So I told myself your life was reckless, and mine was the sensible one. She gave a shaky laugh. Turns out, the woman jumping out of planes and going God knows where under a flag was the stable one, she said. And we were the ones having tantrums in your absence. Steam fogged my glasses. I took them off, wiped them on the hem of my shirt. You could have asked, I said. You could have said, I'm scared for you. I don't understand. Tell me as much as you can. She stared into her soup. I didn't know how, she said. And I was ashamed that I didn't have the language for the life my own daughter chose. She looked up, eyes red. So I pretended your life was wrong instead, she finished. The honesty hurt more than the contempt ever had. We ate a few spoonfuls in silence. The soup was too salty, but it was hot, and my hands wrapped around the bowl felt grounded. After a while, she set her spoon down. Are you angry we brought the suit? She asked. The question was almost timid. Yes, I said, and no. She frowned. That's not an answer, she said. It's the real one, I said. I'm angry you dragged me into a courtroom instead of knocking on my door and saying, we don't understand, can we talk? I'm relieved in a twisted way because it forced everything out into the open. Your version, mine, Grandma's. I tapped the blue notebook on the counter. The judges, I added. Mom exhaled slowly. When he said Navy Cross, she said, I thought he'd misread it. I thought, maybe you married someone. Maybe it was your husband's. She waved a hand vaguely. Didn't ring on my finger, I pointed out. She gave a weak smile. I know, she said. It's just, I had this picture of you in my head. Wild, impulsive, chasing danger for the thrill. And he starts listing leadership, responsibility, bringing people home. She shook her head. I realized the person I'd been gossiping about at potlucks didn't exist, she said. She never had. Her gaze met mine. I am so sorry, Jordan, she said. For every time I let someone believe you were less. For every time I believed it myself, because it made me feel better about being scared. The words weren't fancy. They still landed like something breaking open. You hurt me, I said. You and Dad both. You let your fear turn into contempt and let that contempt turn into this. I gestured vaguely, a circle taking in the courthouse, the petition, the way the town had looked at me this morning. I know, she whispered. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just don't want this to be the last version of us. I thought of Eleanor's line about giving them a chair, not the keys. This can be a first version, I said slowly. We don't have to decide today what the last one looks like. Her shoulders dropped like she'd been bracing for a shove and got something else instead. Okay, she said. We ate the rest of the soup in companionable quiet, if not quite comfortable. Later, as she rinsed the bowls at the sink, old muscle memory, catching on grooves worn by decades of her mother's hands, she glanced out at the fields. You going to keep it? She asked. The house? For now, I said. Maybe the long haul. Alone? She asked carefully. I shrugged. I've lived in worse places with more complicated people, I said. I'll see what it feels like with just me and whatever I build here. She nodded, dried her hands. Your father and I talked about helping with the roof, the fence, things we let slide, she said. If you'll have us. As workers, not decision makers. That phrasing, workers, not decision makers, told me she'd read more of the diary than she'd admitted. We'll start with steps, I said. Roofs later. She smiled, a small wobbly thing that looked more like my own than I'd ever noticed before. Steps first, she agreed. When she left, the house felt quieter, but not empty. I walked back into the living room, sat in Eleanor's rocking chair, and opened the blue notebook again. Toward the back, in a section I hadn't reached yet, she'd written about my parents. If they come to you with lawyers in tow, don't be shocked. They never learn to trust the ground under their feet. Money feels like safety to them. You know different. I snorted softly. Yes, I do, I muttered. Further down the page, one line was underlined 3 times. Let the law do its work, then decide what justice looks like in your own house. Justice, not revenge. Justice was the judge upholding her will. Justice was me choosing who got to sit at this table and who didn't. Justice, I realized, might be as simple and as hard as letting them help repair what they'd neglected while still keeping the deed in my name. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from Caleb. If you ever need help with the fields, I've still got the tractor keys. No strings, just asking. I stared at it for a long second, thumb hovering. Then I typed back 2 words. We'll talk. It wasn't a surrender. It was an opening. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was a flat, pale blue, the kind that promised more cold but also more light. I closed the notebook and looked around the room. The worn rug, the bare patch of floor where a future couch might go, the wall where Eleanor's cross-stitch used to hang. The house wasn't just an inheritance anymore, it was an opportunity. Not just to prove I could manage property, but to decide who I wanted to be when I wasn't on a mission, under orders, or fighting someone else's war. For the first time in a very long time, I was starting to understand that this fight, the one for my own life, on my own terms, was just beginning. Spring came slow to Maple Falls. Snow receded in ragged patches, revealing soggy grass and last year's leaves pressed flat like old thoughts. The fields behind the farmhouse shifted from gray to the faintest green, like someone had washed color back into them by hand. Inside, I moved through rooms half in transition. Boxes labeled kitchen, keep, and attic, sort. Later, old curtains taken down, fresh primer drying on one wall while Eleanor's floral wallpaper clung stubbornly to another. The Navy Cross citation stayed in its folder for a while, tucked on the mantel next to Grandma's framed Polaroid. It felt wrong to hang it on the wall like a trophy when the dust from the courtroom was still settling. Instead, I hung her old calendar there. The one with handwritten notes about when to start seeds and when the church was doing potlucks, and let the medal live quietly in the desk drawer under her checkbook. The town adjusted faster than my family did. At the grocery store, Miss Muz Copeland from choir touched my arm and said, "We had no idea, dear," in a tone that said she meant both the medal and the mess. At the diner, the waitress who'd given me extra fries as a teenager topped off my coffee and asked, "So, Chief, huh?" Like the word had grown 3 sizes overnight. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't give speeches. I just made a point of being visible. As myself, not as the villain from my parents' story or the hero from the judge's summary. I helped Mr. Peterson unload lumber from a truck outside the hardware store. I sat on the bleachers at a little league game with Caleb's kids when he invited me, cheering their names so loud it made them laugh. I carried boxes for Mom into the church basement for a rummage sale. Nobody looked away when I walked in anymore. They looked at me. It was unsettling and healing. On the farmhouse front, I started with what I understood. Structure, logistics, schedules. I made a list: roof inspection, septic check, tree trimming, fence repair, paint, garden layout. I attacked it the way I'd attacked target lists: prioritize, sequence, assign. Every few days, Dad's truck appeared at the end of the drive. Sometimes Caleb's car followed. They never came empty-handed: a ladder, a socket set, a flat of seedlings from the garden center. They never came without asking first. "You free to work on the fence Saturday?" Dad would text. Sometimes I said yes. Sometimes I didn't. The first time he asked and I answered, "Not this weekend, I'm busy." I waited for the old blowback, the guilt trip, the accusations of selfishness. All that arrived was a simple, "Okay, next time then." Mom came on Wednesdays with casseroles and questions she tried hard not to make about work. "Is it scary?" she asked once, hesitating over the word like it might bite. What you do out there? Yes, I said. Sometimes. That's the job. And you go anyway? She asked. Going anyway is the job too, I said. She nodded slowly, absorbing that. I'm proud of you, she said a little later, like she'd been practicing the phrase in the car before she came in. Just so you know, even if I don't always know how to say it right. I heard you, I said. I meant it. One Sunday afternoon, a few weeks after the hearing, Dad and Caleb came with lumber and a worn sketch of the old porch steps Eleanor had once talked about rebuilding bigger. We thought, Caleb said, holding up the paper, if you're going to have people over, maybe we make it so more than 2 people can stand out there without falling through. I looked at the drawing. 3 broad steps, simple railing, enough space for chairs in summer. Grandma would like that, what I said. We spent the day measuring, cutting, arguing over whether to put the posts on the inside or outside of the stringers. Sawdust clung to our clothes, and by dusk my shoulders ached in that satisfying, honest way that had nothing to do with rucksacks or body armor. At one point, Dad set his hammer down and straightened, hand pressed into his lower back. Break? I asked. He shook his head, looking at the half-built steps. You remember when you were 12 and fell off here? He asked. Skinned both knees bloody. Yeah, I said. You told me to stop crying and learn to watch where you're going. He grimaced. I did, he admitted. Should have just picked you up and checked for gravel. We both stared at the boards for a beat. I can't undo that version of me, he said. But I can help build this, if you'll let me. I took in his hunched shoulders. The regret grooved into his face, the way his hand had started to tremble around the hammer when he got tired. Hand me that level, I said. He did. That was my yes. We finished at sunset. The new steps were wide and solid, the boards straight, the railing firm under my palms. We stood side by side at the top and looked out over the yard, the fields, the lingering patches of snow in shaded corners. From here, it almost looked like possibility. A week later, the Navy called. The official investigation into my parents' petition triggered an automatic review of my outside legal matters. A bland email from the JAG office informed me that with the civil case closed and no misconduct found, my record remained clear. At the bottom, a line from my CO. Good work keeping your bearing, Chief. Take the time you need. The teams will be here. It felt strange to realize I had 2 worlds now that, for once, weren't tearing me in opposite directions. One was all sand and steel and classified AP orders. The other was steps and soil and people who were finally trying, in their clumsy human way, to meet me where I actually lived. Somewhere between them stood this house. A few months later, late spring laying something soft over the land, we held a small gathering at the farmhouse. Not a party, not a performance, just a table on the newly widened porch. Eleanor's old table, refinished, covered in mismatched plates, my unit's potluck contributions, Mom's potato salad, Caleb's lopsided cake. Judge Albright came, pressed by Mom's insistence on saying thank you properly. He showed up in a worn blazer, shook my hand, and handed me a potted rosebush. My wife insisted, he said. She says every porch needs at least 1 rose, preferably where the neighbors can see it and be jealous. I laughed. We'll plant it where Grandma can see it from her rocking chair, I said. He nodded toward the chair by the window. Eleanor helped my folks when they almost lost their house, he said quietly. Nobody knew. She came by with grocery sacks when things were tight and paid my dad's overdue electric bill without making a fuss. He glanced around at the people filling the yard and porch. I'm glad her story is landing in hands that understand quiet service, he added. The phrase warmed something in me that had been cold for a long time. Later, as the light faded and fireflies began to pulse in the ditches, I found myself on the porch steps with Dad on one side and Caleb on the other. Mom perched on the top step behind us, her chin on her knees. Across the yard, kids chased each other with glow sticks. Someone's Bluetooth speaker cycled through classic rock and country. The air smelled like grilled meat, cut grass, and the faint sweetness of Mom's rose perfume. It hit me suddenly that this was the family picture I'd never known I wanted. Not the posed Christmas card their version of life had always demanded, but this messy, noisy, imperfect warmth. Dad cleared his throat. I, he said, got something for you. I raised an eyebrow. It's not a lawsuit, is it? I said dryly. He winced, then chuckled. Deserved, he said. No, it's. He fumbled in his jacket and pulled out a small, battered envelope, edges soft from years of handling. Your grandmother gave me this when you enlisted, he said. Told me, give it to her when you're proud instead of scared. He handed it over. I never got there, he said. Till now. The paper felt thin but sturdy between my fingers. Inside was a photo, grainy, black and white, of Eleanor in her 20s, standing in front of this same farmhouse, hair pinned back, eyes bright. On the back, in her looping hand, she had written, For when courage runs in the family and somebody finally sees it. My chest tightened. She knew you'd get here, Dad said quietly, even when I didn't. He swallowed. I'm sorry it took a judge reading your record out loud for me to pull my head out of my backside, he added. Should have just listened to you the first time you said, this is who I am. I looked at the photo again. Better late than never, I said. He let out a long breath. Better late than never, he echoed. Inside, through the open window, I could see the Navy Cross citation now framed on the wall. Not in the center, not as an altar, but alongside Eleanor's calendar, a photo of Caleb's kids, and a new print Mom had brought of the farmhouse in summer. It wasn't there to impress anyone. It was there to remind me that the person in that file, the one who led, decided, carried, had always been the same girl Eleanor saw in the rocking chair with chocolate on her face. Silence settled comfortable around us on the steps. Mom rested her cheek on her knees. You know, she said softly, all those years we spent telling people some half-truth about you. I think I was mostly trying to convince myself. She glanced at me. I like this version better, she said. The one where we actually ask who you are and let the answer be bigger than our little lives. I smiled, small and real. Me too, I said. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass like tiny signal lamps. Out beyond the fields, somewhere on the other side of the horizon, teams I loved would be gearing up, logging runs, checking gear. That world would always call to me, but tonight the mission was simpler. Protect the legacy of the woman who'd raised me, guard my own peace with the same ferocity I'd guarded strangers in bad places. Let the people who had finally chosen humility sit in the circle, on the porch, at the table, without handing them the reins again. The facts had spoken in that courtroom, the file, the diary, the will, the judge's voice. Now the rest was on us. Pride had finally blinked. We had a chance, if we chose it, to grow into a family that deserved the truth. I tucked Eleanor's photo carefully back into its envelope, slid it into my back pocket, and rose. Come on, I said, offering my hand to Dad. We've got a rose bush to plant. He took it. As we walked down the new steps together, I felt the boards hold firm under our combined weight. For once in this town, the foundation felt solid, built not on assumptions or old stories, but on facts, on effort, and on the messy, ongoing work of telling the truth and then living like it mattered. Let the facts speak, and let the healing start where pride finally stops.